Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts. We're coming to you today with another deck that took me from bronze to diamond, and we're going to break that deck down. What deck is it? Well, before we get into that, short disclaimer, we're going to try and speed run this one. I got some feedback, and we're going to make an attempt to, make it a little more concise. Definitely let me know down in the comments on this video or on other social medias, which you should be able to see down there below me, as to whether you prefer this format or the old one. Definitely want to be producing what people want to watch and listen to. But without much further ado, it's kind of fitting that we're going to be going faster because we're going to be talking about Tempo Tessa. Starting off where we usually do, we're going to talk about the champion's abilities, but before we even do that, let's talk a little bit about Tempo. Now, I could do a very long video, and there have been way better card players than I trying to describe what Tempo is within the context of card games, and it's actually kind of difficult to define. But basically, as you can kind of get from what the word tempo means, we're trying to play temporally and try and take advantage of certain windows in time in order to pressure our opponent and close the game out before they go sideways. So let's talk about the abilities. First one that you're going to start with is Lightning Strike. This is deal 2 damage to target enemy minion. It is stunned for 1 turn. While it does feel a little expensive at 3 blood, this is pretty relevant, and keep in mind that you can hit something with the stun through protected. You're not required to do the damage. It could function as removal, it could set something up to be removed in combat, or it could just simply buy you time. Hey, tempo, temporal, time, all that fun stuff. It comes up later again. Next up is the one that most people are probably drawn to, and it was recently changed in A2. That's Channel Insight. You conjure a random myth or chaos spell. Previously, you were getting card advantage, but it was also a higher blood cost. Here, you're getting your choice of things, which is, pretty much better when you get to influence what's happening. Now, it's a very wide array of spells. It's entirely possible you get hot garbage, or you could hit the nuts. I've definitely had games where I've cast 3, 4, 5 meteor storms. It's kind of hard to contend with that. If it's possible, you want to be spending blood on this, but realistically, in virtually every game I played, I used all 3 blood abilities. Now, the third one is Harness the Source, which reduces the cost of all runes in your hand by 1 mana. You need to be careful when you utilize this, because often I found myself playing too quickly and then going, oh yeah, I meant to use that. Well, I'll just use it now. No, that's even worse because you use it at the end of your turn for no gain. You could have used it next turn when you draw. It's something very simple, but it's very easy to fall into that trap. Now, again, it's a very heavy cost or blood cost ability, but as you'll see if you take a peek over the deck list, there are some high-end cards in this list, and there are many others that could have made the cut. So therefore, it definitely behooves you to try and activate this at least once on the 7, 8, and 10 cost cards. It allows you to kind of vomit your hand out there when your opponent isn't expecting things to happen on those turns, either earlier or just multiple effects in a single turn. Plus, if you have a lot of these high-cost cards, as we've mentioned with other builds, you can sometimes end up filling up your entire hand and either not drawing cards or just not being able to leverage things such as A2. So by reducing the cost, it allows you to play more of them more quickly. As a unit, the 3 blood abilities do play in very well, and as mentioned, I typically activate each of them at least once a game. Now, that does matter when we talk about Crazed Alchemist, who I can't say enough about, but you need to be very careful about how you're expending your blood, and it will vary per matchup which thing you want to do. Obviously, against low minion count decks, Lightning Strike doesn't quite matter, and you generally want to use Channel Insight. You may even skip Harness the Source. However, even against those low minion decks, you could still have value for A1 because the few minions that they do have are often very impactful. Conversely, if you're playing against something more aggressive or lower to the ground, higher velocity, you probably want to Lightning Strike a bunch of things, both to buy yourself some life total as well as remove the threats, therefore buying you more life total in the long run. Overall, I really like each of Tessa's blood abilities. This is one of the champions where, compared to other ones where you can kind of get away without it, I feel like you really do want all of these, but definitely A1 and A2. I'm happy that they are front-loaded as compared, although you can get to A3 much quicker now. So here's the bulk of the discussion. Let's jump into the actual card. We're actually sporting a singleton asset spray, and I could certainly see this leaving the deck, but it's nice to have this early game answer for simple things that you just have to remove or you need to get through protected, which is showing up with more regularity thanks to Kingdom's Construct and Priests just in general popping up in more light-based builds. It allows you to get through those sort of effects, maybe finish something off, set something up, or it's also 0 mana cost if you're able to activate a 3. Not necessarily the most compelling arguments for something that ultimately is not spectacular removal in this current meta. I could definitely see this getting replaced, but it had its purposes. As mentioned earlier, I can't really say enough about Crazed Alchemist. This is an auto-include in every single deck that can play it. And I'm not kidding. Just trust me on this. This should be, if you're planning on playing any Chaos heroes, any Chaos champions, craft Crazed Alchemist immediately, put into your win rate will go up. That's the bottom line. You do, as mentioned earlier, have to juggle this a little bit because between the high end of the deck, your A2, your expenditure of your blood, you could have weird turns where, hey, I'm going to draw 4 cards off of this because I've been banking blood for a reason, but I already have 6 cards in hand, or I have a hand that's full and I just can't use it effectively, or I had to expend all my blood in order to maintain board position, gain a board advantage, whatever, and the Alchemist, I got to sit on it for a while, which is fine, but you have to take that into consideration, maybe more so than you do with other Chaos champions. Now, we're also sporting Combust. Combust, I've found, along with its counterpart Annihilate, which came in later, is pretty important because you do, realistically, being a Chaos Myth champion, have challenges with enemies that have a bigger butt. Now, that could be Dawn A3 builds, that could be Emrys, that could just be big fatties that come down. The bottom line is that a lot of your damages, or excuse me, a lot of your removal is damage-based, is where I was going with it. You do have other options in both factions, and we'll get to those, but the problem is that sometimes you just have to make something go away, and if it's too big to either take it out in combat or something else, you're kind of up a creek, so that's where Combust comes in. Now, next up is one of my just full-stop favorite cards in Sever the Source. It just does so many fun things, which sounds a little silly given that it just does damage and mana reduction, but reducing mana is incredible, especially, again, in this deck, especially in conjunction with your A3. You could have stacking reductions on any given card, and all of a sudden your Apocalypse costs 7? Like, that could be pretty bonkers when you go, I'll Apocalypse, wipe the board, and then follow up with something. I mean, in this particular build, what's it going to be? A Crazed Alchemist? But at least you can do that as compared to taking the entire turn off. So Sever the Source definitely plays in. Plus, of course, face is sometimes the place. So next up is Unruly Spirit. This has appeared in many of my Chaos builds, and it's fine. I could certainly see replacing this card. It's nice to fuse it. It almost never happens. If it does, your opponent's hand was either atrocious or you're probably beating up on somebody that is just unprepared. Unruly Spirit at least gives you something early to do in the game. It could, especially if you fuse it, allow you to get some card advantage. It's unlikely, but it fits the theme, but it's something you could consider replacing. It's worthwhile early on, at least. Next up is one of the important cards for the deck from the removal perspective, and that's Dimensional Rift. Remember all that stuff I was saying about Combust? Well, this allows you to bypass all of those things that suddenly have stacked buffs on it, or it's just enormous and you can't remove it. Or you just want a tempo gain. So if you can present a couple of threats, say it's a Sickle Stalker, say it's a Phoenix, it's a whatever, you just have bodies on the board and you're punching your opponent, and then they say, okay, well, I'm going to take some damage, but I have a turn to breathe. I'm going to play one of the new constructs, and then I'll generate card advantage and take over in the late game. Well, funny story, I just set you back a turn, and it's going to cost you more to replay that. Dimensional Rift is spectacular in aggressive decks, as well as more mid-rangey tempo ones such as this that want to try and buy time. Leverage the advantage now, and then it'll pay off over the course of the game. Now, next up is Sickle Stalker. While we're not particularly featuring the entire Blitz package, Sickle Stalker is just strong enough to justify it. You could definitely add Iron Beast or even Mastodons, or if you really want to go crazy, Mindless Raiders. I went out of my way with this build to actively not use too much Blitz, and it actually worked out. Would we be better off with more Blitz? I think so. I think so. It's going to take some reworking, but there are definitely cards, ones that I've already mentioned and ones coming up, that I could see rotating out in favor of more Blitz. Next up is a late addition to the deck, and that's Storm Fury Mage. So generally, I can't stand cards or effects that have literally the word random on it. I don't even like it when they're pseudo-random. It's just hard for me to get behind it. And when it literally says random on the card, it immediately, like, my skin crawls. It's gross. But Storm Fury Mage here can generate a lot of value over the course of the game. If you're able to play it and then play a mana orb into something else, or you can play the aforementioned Acid Spray on turn 5. It was cost reduced, so you could do Storm Fury Mage plus something else, or you A3'd, whatever it happens to be. If you can play it and immediately get value out of it, you're in great shape. It also ends up representing a fairly sizable threat. Unfortunately, it has a 4 on the back end, so it'll die cleanly to opposing Sickle Stalkers and a number of other effects, but you can't have everything. Is this really what you want? I think an effect like this is important for the deck. Whether it ends up being Storm Fury Mage, I'm not sure. It was added in my final push to Diamond, but I could see skipping it. Of note, it also plays well with A2, because you're going to get free spells. Well, free. Just something to keep in mind. Now, the other half of the Combust Annihilate combo is, well, Annihilate. And Annihilate, again, fulfills the purpose of, hey, that thing's really big. It needs to go away. Especially these higher-end minions, and I almost want to flip the Combust Annihilate lineup, where it's 2-1 in favor of Annihilate over Combust, because I played a number of games where there were just minions that were too big, and they were on the higher end for me to effectively deal with. Now, Dawn, the more recent iterations based on her new A3, have become problematic because you could have those middle-sized 5-cost minions or just several minions that are beyond range. Similarly, Hyperia with setting up a good Phalanx formation or other options could present an issue, but Annihilate and Combust are the way that we're trying to help combat those. Now, the first up of our sweepers is Arcane Overload. Honestly, I'm not really happy with it. There are enough high-cost cards in this deck that you could realistically Arcane Overload for a significant amount. Is that good enough? I'm not sure. You do take a lot of damage, and a lot of this build is, well, I'm going to play off lanes, keep pressuring, and then try and remove your threats as I'm going. Whether it's through Storm Fury Mage, it's through Blitz, it's through Burn, it's through targeted removal. I want to preserve my threats and keep pushing. Not in a true aggro sense where I'm really low to the ground. Again, you have a higher curve in this build. Arcane Overload does put in some work, can put in some work, but you're obviously going to have those games where it's like, oh, I flipped Acid Spray, I guess I lose. Or, oh, I flipped Apocalypse to kill your, 4 health dude. I take 10. That's probably going to cause me to lose as well. I think I want to replace this, but depending on the meta, this might be important just to have extra copies of a sweeper. Next up is Phoenix, which is a card that I really like but may not fit here. It allows you to hit breakpoints that you might not ordinarily be able to hit. Suddenly, your Sever the Source is now dealing 4 in conjunction with Phoenix, or other effects, maybe just blocking with an existing Phoenix. Or when piled onto other effects such as Meteor Storm or Manticore or whatever, you'll now hit breakpoints that you wouldn't otherwise hit. The evasion here normally in Flight is a drawback. I found that in a number of cases, but in a deck like this where you're trying to, again, produce that temporal advantage, just putting pressure on your opponent and then bouncing their stuff is good enough. If they try to block it, well, guess what? I'm still getting through for the damage. And then you have that option of, well, I'll bounce that other guy that you had on the board. I'll pop that other guy with an Annihilate or Combust or do whatever. It doesn't matter, because then the Phoenix is still getting through. And of course, the Resurrect means that you're presenting another threat subsequently. That being said, the Warcry has not been spectacular as of late. Again, these chunkier minions may necessitate a change here. Now, one of the things that it could get dropped in favor of is Manticore. Manticore, I only recently unlocked, and I've been looking forward to this card a lot. I love this card. I've only gotten to play it a handful of times, and already I'm in love with it. I knew I was going to be. I mean, I made the joke on stream that this guy's got a face for radio, but that's okay, because he's got a special place in my heart. Dealing 5 is significant. Granted, it comes out on turn 6. Again, you have the whole flight discussion, but tempo, it's a 5/5. It's sizable. It'll dodge certain removal. It'll dodge It'll survive a hit from Sickle Stalker. It'll live through a Desert Twister, although obviously it'll probably die to follow up. But 5 damage is significant in order to make sure that you can remove certain things. Now, a lot of the constructs will ultimately evade this and an 8-1. It becomes a little challenging. This is where it gets messy because it's not uncommon to end up having to spend 2 turns, which is the exact opposite of what you want to be doing. Again, going back to the tempo, it's a broken record, but got to keep rehashing it. You want to make sure that you are dealing with things as efficiently and effectively as possible so that you aren't falling behind. You really need the advantages to stack up in your favor. So anytime you can't remove something cleanly, it gets rough. Hence why maybe Manticore gets the nod over Phoenix. We'll have to see. Now moving from there, we have, of course, Longship Raid. This can get a little sticky because you end up filling up your hand with A2s or sitting on things that may remove something or not remove something. So you often, in the early and middle turns, have to map out and plan out exactly how and when you're going to play certain cards. That's true of all decks, but in this tempo-oriented deck, whiffing on a turn by saying, well, I have to do something really clunky, or, well, I just missed this turn because I can't play a Longship Raid and then only get 1 Viking and 2 go on top. That's ridiculous. You really need to map out these turns to ensure that you are hitting optimally every time. I don't want to cut Longship Raid because it's so good, but I think that revisiting what the top end looks like is definitely worthwhile. Now, of course, we're going to be featuring Meteor Storm. It's the premier chaos removal. It's way too good to not be playing. As I mentioned earlier, you could, of course, hit extras on A2. I think this card is definitely worth including. I would have a hard time justifying less than 2. Now, lastly is Apocalypse, which I actually don't like really at all. It's kind of a safety net. I would much prefer Set, because then it wipes the board but still presents a threat. Now, you may be saying, hey, Random, what about things with Bury? What about things, or excuse me, not things with Bury, what about things with Resurrect, which is kind of sort of Bury effect. Maybe they're attached to the same thing. Yes, that matters, and Apocalypse deals with them, but Set doesn't lose you tempo. When you play Apocalypse, unless you've cost reduced it enough that you can play 2 things, it's taking an entire turn. So you do want this sort of effect, but I really think Set is going to be a better option. So those are all the cards that are in this deck, including a number that could be changed. You can certainly make Diamond with this exact list. I've done so, but it may be worthwhile making a number of changes, so let's go talk about those. To start everything off, we did already mention the Blitz package, which I think everybody can imagine, as well as, of course, there are plenty of legendaries, whether it's Set or otherwise, that you can include. But to talk about some other things, let's focus on Gorgon's Sister momentarily. This kind of solves some of the targeted removal problems for the deck while also presenting a threat. It was in earlier builds and then eventually rotated out. I could definitely see this coming back in because sometimes just locking down the minion is good enough, in which case you can just let it go away of its own volition. And if your opponent chooses not to deal with the Gorgon Sister, which realistically is going to be difficult given Veil, and you lock something into place, that's fine. You got a body. Again, skipping out on the legendaries, which anybody could, slam any of the strong legendaries that fit this particular build. Let's talk about Mana Burn. Despite its nerf, Mana Burn is still very strong, and there are many times that I pulled it off of A2 and secured a win 3 or 4 turns before the game was actually won, because I knew that there was 9 damage coming out of hand, or my opponent played something enormous. I'll just go, no. That goes away. So Mana Burn is definitely very important. I could see it rotating into the list because of the flexibility of the card. It's definitely something to consider if you want to play Tessa. One last time, we'll round out the potential changes with a card that most people are going to have access to, as opposed to legendaries or even the Blitz package that is pretty ubiquitous, and that's Void Mage. I think this one will jump out to everybody as maybe missing from the initial list. It is something that will generate value for you, as well as providing a sizable body. And it really does make sense to get additional reuses out of many of the spells that are already in the list. Void Mage is pretty solid. It's also notably a lower curve option, whereas you could easily stuff the list with 7, 8, 9, 10 cost cards, and then it's, oops, I'm only playing 1 card a turn, and that's not very tempo plus. That's kind of tempo negative. Void Mage can come down earlier, late in the game, maybe you play both of them and draw 2 cards. It's pretty, I mean, it does literally say draw, but you get what I'm saying. It's not from your deck. Point being is that Void Mage could present a number of different options. It's something that I've been considering including. So that's the Tempo Tessa list from A to Z. Hopefully I was able to run through this quickly, but coherently and completely. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up down in the comments or on all the socials that you also should see below this video. If you have any other suggestions for the video series or anything else you'd like to see in Runestrike, definitely hit me up as well. But that'll do it for this time, so as always, everybody, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and Black Lives Matter.